Hey, I'm Lana from Lana Glowshot Art, and in this video, we'll be unboxing the February 2024 Sketchbox. This is a true mixed media box with a bunch of supplies that will help you explore color mixing, mark making, and so much more. Ready? Let's get into it. The surface in this month's box is the Benfeng watercolor paper. This is a 140-pound cold press heavyweight paper, and the surface is great for painting and drawing materials. The first drawing materials in our box are the Staedtler triangular pencils in green and brown. I'm swatching the green colored pencil, and as I do that, I'm building up the color in layers. I'm moving in a variety of different directions, and I'm keeping my colored pencil really sharp. This allows me to get into the texture of the paper, and it also allows me to build up really even coverage without damaging the tooth of the paper, which can be really important for a mixed media approach. For a gradation of color, you're gonna play around with your pressure. Start heavy and then release the pressure as you go. Continue to work in a variety of different directions. These pencils are great for a softer approach or a sketchier approach, but we also have the Zebra Sarasa fine liner in black, which is going to be great for a more concrete line and more aggressive mark making. When you're building up value with this pen, I definitely recommend cross-hatching. Go in a variety of different directions. Pressing harder on the pen is not going to yield a darker mark necessarily like it will with a colored pencil, but with a careful approach, you can build up the thickness of your lines. To get started with these drawing supplies, let's start with a simple still life. Look around your space. Is there something fun that you could draw? I am drawing a potted plant that was on my desk, and the pot is a basic cylinder, so I start with ellipses that I connect with straight vertical lines. Ellipses are hard to draw, and that's exactly why I'm starting with the lightest drawing material in this set, the green colored pencil. I'm drawing very lightly and using this to just lay in the structure. And when I'm drawing the leaves, I'm not worried about getting every single detail or the curve of every leaf perfect. I'm more interested in relationships. I'm using the brown colored pencil as well to help me really look at the negative space. And this gives me another chance to refine the leaves and the relationships. Each layer I am continuing to draw. I'm not tracing, but I'm looking at what my first impression was and I'm editing and refining. Sometimes it can be really helpful to put yourself in the frame of mind like you're editing somebody else's work. This is somebody else's first draft and you're coming in and you are giving them feedback. And I like that mindset when I'm using something really permanent like the Sarasa fine liner. Having the initial layer with colored pencils that's really light gives you an idea of where you're going, so you can come in with a lot of confidence with the fine liner. You can also play around with texture and mark making and even using some marks to show the three-dimensionality of different items in your drawing. Because the colored pencil is so light, you don't even have to worry about erasing it. It's kind of fun to show the history of the drawing in your final product. Next, we have the Jacquard High Tones liquid watercolor set in magenta, leaf green, and violet. And we also have the Winsor & Newton size 4 bamboo brush. This paintbrush comes really hard. It's coated in gum arabic, and if you just bend it and crunch it, you can start painting with it, but you run the risk of damaging the bristles. Instead, I recommend that you continue to soak your bristles in water and then gently manipulate them with your fingers, and repeat this process until your bristles are soft enough and ready to paint with. A dry brush doesn't hold a ton of this pigment, but you'll notice right away how bright and vibrant violet is. Oh my goodness, we are working with some really beautiful colors. When you wet the brush, you can hold a lot more paint. And I'm going to create a gradation here by adding the pure paint first and adding more water as I go. This bamboo brush allows you to create a variety of different lines, and this is a calligraphy brush. So hold it in different ways, play around with different marks you can make. Use the top of the brush, the side of the brush, the point of the brush, and explore a variety of different marks. Next up, I'm swatching the leaf green, and my paintbrush is wet this time, so I'm able to hold more watercolor in my brush and I'm able to move it around a little bit easier. After creating the gradation, I'm playing around with different marks. I really liked this leaf that I was able to create with 2 strokes. See if you can do it too. Next, I'm swatching the magenta. This is an incredibly bright, incredibly intense color that holds its vibrancy even when you dilute it with water. This will be a really fun color to play around with, exploring this month's prompt, which is fantasy. For the next exercise, I want you to wet a section of your paper and really get a lot of water on there. Now drop your watercolors into the water. Use really concentrated paint, so don't water it down first, and allow the paints to mix. So maybe you pick up a color and drop it right on top of another color. Allow the colors to move around naturally on their own, and then just see what you end up with. If you end up with something you really like, you might enjoy drawing on top of it with your fine liner after it's dry. The magenta and the leaf green can be combined together to create a really nice sepia tone, and these same colors in a different ratio can create this really nice earthy green. Play around with the paint when it's wet and when it's dry with a variety of different approaches. Salt on wet paint can create this really cool speckled effect, and you can drop water onto already dry paint to reactivate it and then pull it up with a paper towel. This is how I created bubbles later on in another piece. You can also use really wet paint on top of a dry layer to reactivate it and for the colors to mix. And you'll see this really interesting texture that's created after the paint is dry. I want you to try this creative exercise by mixing up a variety of different washes and laying out some abstract shapes on your piece of paper. You want to make sure there's plenty of water in these and that you allow them to dry completely before you look at them and then turn them into actual objects. When you look at your shapes, you might have no idea what to turn them into, and this is where the creativity and imagination part of this exercise really comes in. This is going to push your brain to come up with a creative solution to the problem, and it also gives you the fun opportunity to play around with mark making on top of a watercolor wash. Which one of these is your favorite? Now we'll put all these supplies and techniques together to create a painting of a betta fish. I start with a very loose gestural sketch that focuses on the movement of the fish, and I pay attention to proportions too, but the movement is definitely the most important part. Then I mix up an earthy green with leaf green and just a little bit of magenta. The first time there was too much magenta in it, so I had to start again. And as I go through and paint the background, I have a more watered down version of this earthy green that I'm using at the edges of the fins so that they feel really transparent. I'm very careful as I move around the complete surface, and I allow this layer of paint to dry completely before I come in with any other additional colors or washes. Remember that first color I mixed up with too much magenta in it? Well, it's going to be perfect for laying in a base layer of the fin and the tail. So I'm going to add more water to that color that I originally created, and I'm going to use really expressive loose strokes to create movement in the fin and the tail. I am pressing medium and then lightening up as I move towards the edges. Now I've got a warm violet color. This is a combination of violet, leaf green, and magenta, and I am doing a speckling effect so that it has a different texture that is more scale-like. I'm adding more water in those areas that I want it to be lighter, and I let this dry completely before I come in and refine some of my details again with colored pencil. I'm looking at scale texture here. I'm looking at proportions, and I'm also looking at the movement in the tail and the fins. And then once I feel really confident about this, I can come in with more color. The order of the color isn't necessarily important. You can be really playful and experimental with this, and it doesn't have to mimic the exact colors of a fish, although betta fish do come in tons of different really bright, vibrant colors. What I think is most important here is that you are very careful with your brush stroke and that it mimics the movement that you want to create in the piece. I also want to recommend that you build up from light to dark and that you don't come in with too much paint over the top of a previous wash unless you want it to kind of manipulate a little bit. If you come in with really heavy wet paint, it can reactivate the lower levels, which we saw in that experimental case earlier. And if you activate that, you can get kind of a bubbly effect. So just keep that in mind. Continue to work in light layers and refine your piece until you are satisfied with it. This might be 1 or 2 layers, it might be 5 or 6 layers, it's really your call, but keep in mind that you don't have to have this completely finalized. You can use your drawing materials once everything is dry to refine and unify the entire piece. Try creating your own betta fish this month with the image we have on screen. Remember to prioritize movement in your sketch and allow yourself to be playful and experimental with your colors. When it comes to our drawing materials, I start off by refining with the colored pencil because it's a softer, less aggressive medium than the fine liner, and it helps me get the movement and the proportions tweaked if I need to. Then I really come in with a strong edge, a strong line with the fine liner on those areas that I want to draw the most attention to and those areas that need the most tweaking or refinement. My final step in this painting is to create some bubbles that help this fish feel like it's in water. And I use that reactive technique by putting water right on the green background and then pulling it off with a paper towel. And I felt that maybe cleaning up some of the edges of some of these bubbles would help. So I used the green colored pencil for that and to also add some emphasis in the fins. And now this piece is complete. I hope you learned a ton about watercolor technique and mark making in this video, and we can't wait to see what you create. So be sure to use the hashtag SketchboxFebruary when you post your work online. For more unboxing videos and tutorials, you can head over to our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.